In the last section, we spoke about how we could reuse that validation logic by putting together a new class that we're going to call Validation Mixin. So in this section, we're going to create this Mixin and then link it up to our login screen state. So I'm going to get started by finding my src directory, and inside there, I'm going to make a new folder called Mixins. So we're going to make our own separate folder to house every Mixin class that we have. Then inside of here, I'll make a new file called validation_mixins.dart. Excuse me, validation mixin singular, just validation mixin. Then inside of here, we'll define a class called validation mixin. And then to this class, we're going to add in a function that we'll call validate email and validate password. So I'm going to flip back over to my login screen. I'm going to find my first validator function tied to email field right here, and I'm going to cut the entire thing. Then I'll flip over to my new mixin. I'll define a method called validate email, and then I'll paste in that entire function like so. And then the only change I'm going to make here is I'm going to annotate validate email as returning a string, like so. Now, when I annotate the return type right here of string, you'll notice that we're now seeing a warning saying, hey, you don't have a return statement in here if you don't enter the if statement. So when I put on that type annotation, I do have to put in return null like so. And when I do so, that warning goes away. Okay, so now we'll repeat the same process with our password validator. So here's my password field. I'll find the validator. I'm going to take that entire function. I'm going to cut it. I'll flip back over. I'm going to add in return type of string, validate password, and then paste what I had just cut. And then I will again add in the return null at the bottom. Okay, so this looks good. We've now got our validation mixin. We can now import that validation mixin over to our login screen state file, and we'll form the link between the two. So I'm going to flip back over to my login screen. You'll notice that our validator fields on both password field and email field are blank. We're going to fix those up in just a second. Let's first import the mixin we just created. So I will import up one directory, mixins, validation, mixin.dart. And then finally, to take all the functionality, all the functions that we added into that mixin, and add them into our login screen state right here, I'm going to find the login screen state declaration, and then after the extend statement, I'll add in with, and then the name of the class I want to mix in, which is going to be validation mixin, like so. I'm going to collapse the sidebar so we can see the whole line. So now we're saying create a new class called login screen state, extend all the functionality from the state base class, and also give me or copy paste all the methods coming from validation mixin into login screen state as well. So now inside of login screen state, we can freely reference the functions that we defined inside of our mixin as though they were directly defined inside of my class. So if I go down to my email field, for the validator right here, I can say anytime we need to validate this thing, just run the function validate email, like so. Notice that I do not have my parentheses on here because I'm not trying to invoke that function. I want to pass a reference to the function validate email to the validator. So validate email right here is coming from my mixin. Now we'll go down to my password field, and I'll do the same thing with this validator as well. So validate password. Okay, that looks good. I'm looking at my sidebar over here where I normally see errors, and I'm not seeing anything. Everything looks pretty good. So I'm going to do a quick refresh, and I will test this thing out one last time. So quick restart, or I guess slow restart, depending upon how you look at it. So I'm going to enter my email in. I will put in a password. I'll submit, and I'm good to go. But now I have some very reusable validation functions that I can use inside of any form that I create inside of my project. So definitely a great way to get some code reuse going. All right, so this looks great. I think we're just about done with this iteration of our login form. So let's take a quick pause right here. When we come back to the next section, we'll start talking about how we're going to implement that block pattern. So quick break, and I'll see you in just a minute.